Picture this. It's May 1945, at a place called Glücksburg Castle on the rocky, windswept coast of northern Germany. Albert Speer, Adolf Hitler's Minister of Armaments, is sitting there in a rumpled suit right across from two American economists. And these Americans were there to figure out how the German war economy had actually ticked, and they were fully expecting evasion, right? Lies, half-truths. Instead, Speer, a man who is literally facing trial for his life, answers every single question with brutal honesty. And when they finally asked him how he ever thought Germany could win a massive industrial war against the United States, his answer was chillingly simple. He hadn't. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to look at the absolutely unbelievable industrial engine that truly won the Second World War.
Speer confessed this directly to his interrogators. He told them he'd been reading the American production figures every single week, but he simply had not been able to make himself believe them. Think about that. This was the guy personally responsible for keeping German tanks rolling off the assembly lines while Allied bombers were actively flattening his cities. He understood production better than almost anyone on the planet. But reading those US numbers, he felt absolute despair. He realized he wasn't just looking at a country that was better at his own profession. No, he was looking at a country doing something his profession didn't even have a name for.
Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly did a country that, in the spring of 1940, was producing fewer tanks per year than Czechoslovakia, suddenly transform into the largest war manufacturing organism the world had ever seen? It's like a giant puzzle. How did they outproduce the battle-hardened German war machine so thoroughly that German intelligence literally refused to even write the numbers down on paper?
Let's look at Section 1, a staggering production gap.
To really get this, we first need to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the mismatch. These right here are the exact same numbers that kept Albert Speer awake at night, numbers that completely overwhelmed any estimates the Axis powers had put together. Between February 1942 and July 1945, the United States built 49,234 Sherman tanks. Germany, in that exact same window, they built just under 6,000 Panthers and barely over 1,300 Tiger Is. The Sherman production was 8 times higher than Germany's absolute best tank and more than 25 times the combined production of their heavy tanks. Let me put that into perspective. The total combined output of Germany's top 3 tank designs across the entire war didn't even equal the production of just one American factory in any given 5-month window in 1943. Insane, right?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the broader context of those 40 months. It is mind-boggling. 90,000 tanks of all types, 300,000 aircraft, 2 million military trucks, 12 million rifles, 41 billion rounds of ammo. Billion with a B. And remember, this explosive output came from a nation that practically didn't even have a tank industry in 1940. So who actually orchestrated this absolute avalanche of machinery? Well, spoiler alert, it wasn't just military generals.
That brings us to Section 2, Architects of Mass Production. The masterminds behind this were a handful of completely unlikely civilians, industrialists, immigrants, mechanics, guys who simply asked very different questions than the German high command did. First up, we have William Bill Knudsen. This guy arrived at Ellis Island in 1900 with $30 in his pocket and zero English. He starts out as a bicycle mechanic, moves to Detroit, and eventually becomes the president of General Motors. When war broke out, FDR needed a production czar. Knudsen gives up his $300,000 a year salary to work for the government for exactly $1. He was commissioned as a lieutenant general, literally the only civilian in U.S. history to enter the Army at that rank. And he didn't just sit behind a desk drawing up master plans. No way. He traveled to the factories. If he saw a poorly arranged production line, he would pick up a piece of chalk, sketch the corrected layout right there on the concrete floor, shake hands with the manager, and head out.
Then there's the incredible, frankly ironic story of Albert Kahn. Born in Germany, the son of a Jewish rabbi, he immigrates to Detroit and becomes the most influential industrial architect alive. In 1929, the Soviet Union actually hires Kahn to design tractor plants to help industrialize their country. He builds over 500 factories for them. When Hitler invades the Soviets, those very same Kahn-designed factories are instantly converted to pump out the T-34 tanks that ended up decimating the German army. And back in America in 1940, this same German-born architect designed the legendary Detroit Arsenal tank plant.
22,234. That is the exact number of Sherman tanks built at Kahn's Detroit Arsenal alone. That one single building, constructed by a German-Jewish immigrant, nearly matched all of Germany's total wartime tank production from every single one of their plants combined.
Moving on to Section 3, craftsmanship versus assembly lines.
But quantity is really only half the story here.
The reason America could produce these numbers while Germany couldn't comes down to a fundamental clash in manufacturing philosophy. So the crucial point is this absolute contrast in industrial culture. Germany relied on a centuries-old guild tradition. The worker was a master mechanic. Every single part on a German tank was bespoke, hand-filed, and meticulously adjusted to fit one specific vehicle. It was beautiful craftsmanship, for sure, but it was incredibly fragile. If you replaced that master mechanic, production just stopped. The American system, born in Detroit, assumed the exact opposite. They designed the machines and the parts to do the skilled work for the human. Parts were entirely modular and interchangeable. That meant a transmission from a factory in Ohio fit perfectly into a chassis built in Michigan. No filing required.
This meant the U.S. worker didn't actually need to be a master mechanic. They were often unskilled laborers. We're talking black sharecroppers, farmers, teenage boys, women entering the workforce, doing one repeated operation on a moving line that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. An entire workforce could be turned over in a matter of weeks without ever dropping output. Contrast this with the dark reality of the German system. As the war dragged on, they increasingly and cruelly relied on forced labor and concentration camp prisoners, people who, understandably, had absolutely no reason to do good work, making an already inefficient bespoke system even worse.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, the battlefield reality.
Because the real test of a manufacturing system isn't in a clean factory, it's out in the mud and the fog of war. Take the Battle of Aricourt in September 1944. Patton's Third Army was attacked by newly formed German panzer brigades equipped with superior Panther tanks. These things had longer guns and thicker armor than the American Shermans. The Americans were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing front armor they often just couldn't penetrate. But using heavy fog, brilliant tactics, and aggressive flanking maneuvers, the American crews fought back ferociously.
And this brilliantly illustrates the true deciding factor of the whole war. In the main phase of that battle, the U.S. lost 14 completely destroyed Sherman tanks. The Germans, they lost 200 Panthers. But the real victory is what happened right after. Those 14 American tanks were replaced from depots in France within weeks, fresh tanks ready to go. The 200 German tanks were never replaced. The Panzer brigades were simply disbanded. It wasn't about having an invincible tank, it was about replacing a destroyed one immediately.
The Germans couldn't replace their tanks because they were completely trapped by their own engineering culture. Take that Panther tank. Beautiful, heavily armed, sure, but a total manufacturing nightmare. Their design choices were driven by rigid schedules, not sustainable combat effectiveness. It required all these scarce alloys and highly specialized tools. And get this, post-war tests showed its final drive, that's the vital gear system that powers the tracks, had an average lifespan of just 150 kilometers before breaking down. 150 kilometers. That's less than the distance from Paris to Brussels. At the Battle of Kursk, more Panthers were actually destroyed by their own mechanical failures than by enemy fire.
But eventually, American quality caught up with its massive quantity. Let's look at March 1945, right in the rubble of Cologne. A German Panther ambushes and destroys 2 Shermans in seconds. Just devastating. But one street away was a brand new American M26 Pershing tank, piloted by a 21-year-old gunner from Pennsylvania named Clarence Smoyer. As Smoyer's tank flanked the intersection, the German commander hesitated. He'd never actually seen this tank silhouette before. Smoyer didn't wait. While his tank was still moving, he fired 3 rapid rounds, destroying the Panther. It was this incredible moment, captured on film, where the German qualitative edge finally, permanently vanished.
Which brings us to our final section, the ultimate deciding factor.
So you gotta wonder, what did the German commanders really think about all this? For decades, post-war memoirs blamed the Russian winter, Hitler's meddling, or the SS. But the honest truth of why they lost was actually recorded in secret. Between 1942 and 1945, the British ran a top-secret surveillance operation at a country house called Trent Park. They housed high-ranking captured German officers there, treating them to good food, beautiful gardens, the whole shebang. But what the generals didn't know was that the British had bugged literally everything. The light fixtures, the fireplaces, the billiard tables, even the trees outside. Down in the basement, intelligence officers quietly transcribed 150,000 pages of unguarded, totally honest conversations.
And in those private, unvarnished transcripts, the generals didn't claim America cheated, and they didn't just point to crude material superiority. They bluntly admitted they had not been able to predict how a country could do what the United States had done. Their deep-rooted culture of guild craftsmanship just couldn't fathom a system where a teenage boy or a farmer could bolt together standardized parts on a moving line and completely outproduce the finest master mechanics in Europe. It just broke their brains.
Now, the captured generals predicted one more thing at Trent Park, that this unsustainable, monstrous industrial giant would just vanish the second peace was declared. And you know what? They were absolutely right. The moment the war ended, the tank plants closed. Just like that. The Detroit arsenal stopped making tanks. The factory switched right back to making station wagons, washing machines, and dishwashers for a booming consumer market. Bill Knudsen, he just went back to Detroit. Clarence Smoyer went back to a cement plant in Pennsylvania.
Which leaves us with this final, kind of staggering thought. The Western Front wasn't won by a flawless, invincible supertank. It was won by the sheer staggering volume of interchangeable parts, created by an industrial culture that prioritized speed and scale over bespoke perfection. What does it say about history that the world was quite literally saved by countless unnamed civilians? The women riveting bomber wings, the farm boys welding turrets, people who just wanted a steady wage, clocked in for a Tuesday night shift, and accidentally built an engine that crushed fascism. It's a legacy of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and it's a machine the world has literally never seen since.